Okay, what we're going to do in this video is create a ZIO Kafka consumer, and I'm going to use the consumeWith approach that I showed in a previous video. And what we're going to do in addition to that is start deserializing JSON data. So far all we've done is get the data back from the Kafka server, and we've treated that as a string. And now we're going to start deserializing it to JSON data. And I added a note here about this version also includes some debug code. And that's because as I started working with this, you realize that you can sometimes have bad data and you're going to need to do something about that. So in this particular application, our app is going to crash when we get bad data. And I will show you that, and then we'll fix that in the next video. So as usual, we're creating an object, some name, extend ZIO app default. I import the Confluent consumer settings that we need, and we're still working with the same quotes JSON topic. And if I come over here, you'll see that right here, and you'll see that it's currently empty, and we'll take care of that in just a moment. And what's new here is that we're going to have some case classes to represent our JSON structures. So you've seen in the past that our key is going to be an ID, which is an int, and maybe I should go ahead and just populate that data so we could take a look at that. So the way I'm going to populate that is with this application over here. This is an application I call producer list. The number is 135 if you want to check that out of the GitHub repository. And what I'm going to do here is instead of inserting all of these messages right here, I'm going to insert just the first two of these messages. So the first one is be here now, and then the second one is be a witness, not a judge. And this class is called Kafka Producer Multiple Messages. So what we can do is come over to SBT, and if I go back through the history, there is Kafka Producer Multiple Messages. So I don't think I've shown this before in this course, but you can run that with this run main method inside of SBT. So let's go ahead and run that right now. And I will say run, and we'll come over here and look at this. And you may have seen that finish running over here. And in just a moment, this should update over here. All right, so we see the new data over here. We have these two quotes, and you can see the partitions and the offsets as well. So again, if I come here, click in here, and we look at the key, you can see the ID there is 1, and that's what I was starting to refer to in the code over here, is that the key data, we're going to have an ID as an int, and as you saw over here, the first one is 1. Then if I come over to the value, you can see the value has two components, a quote, which is this, and an author, which is this. And when we come back over here, that is our quote data. So we have a quote is a string and author is a string. So that's why I wanted to populate that data so we could take a look at that. So this part is new. And then the second part that's going to be new is these JSON codecs for our case classes. And I believe I showed all of this in a previous course, but let's go ahead and take a look at it. And as an example, we're going to look at the key decoder, which is this first one right here. So the JSON decoder is a type class that's defined. So you see that right here. And our first instance, I'm going to call key decoder right here. And that's going to be this one right here. So the way you create it is you just say, I want to derive JSON encoder.gen. You give the name of your case class right here. And when this runs, it creates an instance of a JSON decoder that is parameterized for the key data type. So when we go back up to the documentation, we can see that the JSON decoder, or the key decoder in this case, knows how to convert a JSON string into a Scala case class, and in this case, the key data case class. And the derive JSON encoder.gen call automatically generates the conversion logic that's needed based on the structure of your class. And now as I've been talking, I realize we did cover this in a previous course, so I don't want to get into that too much. The only thing you really need to know is that we are working with a type class here. So it's a type class defined in the ZIO JSON library. So if I come down here, you will see that's in the ZIO JSON library right there. And JSON decoder is also in the ZIO JSON library. And that's a really cool thing about Scala 3 is that these type classes can do something so cool that they can automatically convert a JSON string into a Scala case class with just this little bit of coding right here. So that's a really wonderful thing about Scala 3 type classes. All right, then the next thing that's new is that we are going to create these deserializers, these custom deserializers for our key and value types right there. These don't have to be as long as they are, but they are this long because I'm using debug code here, here, and here. Otherwise, the code would really just be this line right here and this line right there. So a couple things to know about them. They are custom deserializers for JSON with debug logging in this case. The key deserializer, which is this one right here, uses the key decoder implicitly when deserializing JSON data from Kafka. So as an example, the key deserializer is a ZIO Kafka concept that knows how to convert raw bytes from Kafka into a useful Scala type. And I added these notes here that when we call Kafka, we're getting raw bytes back from it. And then we're going to use this deserializer.string call, which is going to be right there. We're going to transform those bytes into a string using this method right here. And then once we have this string, we're going to call keystring.fromJSON parameterized with this key data type. And that is going to implicitly use the key decoder up here. And that's going to create a key data instance. So if we look at the code down here, this is the deserializer string call right here. So this is the one that's going to convert the Kafka bytes into a string, which you can see right there. Then we're going to call map ZIO on that. And then this effect in here is going to convert this string in the end into the key data type right inside of here. But before that, what I'm doing is a little bit of debugging. So I'm going to say console.println debug. I want to print the raw key JSON value right there. So I'm going to print this string and then say or die. And then what I'm going to do is this code right here. So keystring.fromJSON is going to return an either value. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But as you see here, it attempts to decode the raw JSON string that we get as the type A. So our type right here is this key data. So it's going to attempt to decode the JSON it gets and return a key data value. But that process can fail, so that's why that returns an either right there. So then we say wrap that in this from either call right here. And as you see in the documentation, that lifts an either into a ZIO value. And then this returns an IO with the error value and the success value right there. And then for our debugging purposes, what I'm doing is I'm saying tap into that error and give me this debug information right here. And then what I'm saying is also map that error. So if there is an error, what I want to do is take that error type, transform that into a new runtime exception like this. And that's going to make our code blow up. So obviously that's not ideal in the real world, but we're going to handle that better in the next video. So that's how our deserializer works for the key value. And the code down here is basically the same for the value deserializer. So again, we're going to take the raw bytes, convert it to a string, and then map ZIO says use this effect to transform this value into a quote data right here. We have the from either again, and then the tap and the map right there. And then we have the previous debug line right there. So we'll see this output once we start running this code. But I just want to show you that for this code to work, what we do is we have case classes for our data types. Then we have decoders for our data types. And then we have deserializers for our data types. And again, the deserializers would be much shorter if I wasn't doing all this debugging. It would just be roughly like that. But I am doing this debugging because of the problems we're about to run into. Okay, so now let's look at our ZIO run value right here. So what we're going to do in here is create this program. So we're going to say val program equals this for expression right here. So note that I haven't used ZIO scoped yet. And what I'm going to do is use ZIO scoped and wrap that around this program value down here at the end. So our program is, we're going to have a startup message when we first start. So it says starting Kafka consumer with JSON debugging. And then what we're going to do is create and use our Kafka consumer. Again, this we properly closed by ZIO scoped right down here. And now I think a lot of this code is going to be the same as what you saw in the previous video. So we have comment, we have consumer.make and then flat map, and then we have the consumer value right there. And then we're going to say consumer.consumeWith. So again, this is the higher level API. We're not using ZIO streams right here. We're using the ZIO workflow approach with consumeWith. And this code right here is exactly the same as what we've used before. And this code right here. So now we're getting to our deserializer. So this code is different than what we had before. I think I was using just string types here earlier, and now we're saying, oh, okay, now we actually want to use the deserializers that we created up here. So those are our two deserializers. Those are going to do the work for us of converting the JSON into instances of our case classes. And then, assuming that works, we're going to have a record. And as the note here says, this function is going to be called for every Kafka message. So for every Kafka message, we are going to print out this information, the success, the ID right there, the quote, and the author, like that. And then down here, we have the end of our for expression. We're going to yield our result. So you see the result is right here. And that's a unit in this case because all we're doing is printing that information. And as I mentioned, we have the program here, and now I've wrapped that program in ZIO scoped. So what I did in the previous examples was I had ZIO scoped. If I had copied that and I put it up here, I would have wrapped all of this code right here with ZIO scoped. And I just changed that so you can get another idea of how you can use ZIO scoped. But that is this application. So if I scroll up here, this one is named Consumer JSON Kafka consumeWith. And again, we have these two records over here. And now I could say, I want to run that consumer. So consumer JSON Kafka consumeWith. And again, there should be two records here, and we should see two records of output here, along with all of our debug information. Okay, and I did not mention, but this program will run forever, so I'll kill it in just a moment. But what I wanted to show is that the debug information is printing out the raw key. We have the ID of 1 and then the ID of 2, and then we have the value information, and that's the quote there and that quote there. And then the success information comes here at the end. And if we look at our code, I can slide that over there. We can see that we're getting this debug information for both keys right there. We're getting this debug information for both values right here. And then the success is coming out of this portion of the code right here. So as you can imagine, the deserializers run before we get to the success portion of the code right here.